Okay, so today we'll look into hair. So no character looks nice without hair, well, except bald ones. So I guess we can broadly separate two types of characters, bald ones and the ones with hair. Usually we care about the ones with hair. So there are basically three types of ways to create hair in 3D graphics in general. So on one hand, usually used for low poly stuff like here. So basically what you see here is the character doesn't really, I mean, okay, this thing here is a separate here, but everything here is just the same model as the character itself. Like if we look here, probably it's not a separate model, it's the same thing, just, you know, extruded shape, so to speak. Like here, it's just a mesh, just a piece of, you know, of geometry. So what's good about this here? It's relatively easy to make. It's probably easiest thing to make is just the same way as you model everything. You model the hair the same way. So it's just another shape, you know, if we have, we'll talk about that later. Object mode. So say this is our head. Of course, it's a very simplified version, but let's pretend this is our head and say this is the top of the head. I will just extrude it, put a different material on it, different color, and this is basically my hair. So that's kind of the simplest approach, probably simplest approach. But what its advantage, of course, is that it's much easier to make, and it's not necessarily that it's very low poly characters that use this. If you look at this hair, it's not low poly at all, most likely not low poly. So it could be used in highly stylized characters, in low poly characters like here, and another option is for characters who don't have a lot of hair. So if we need to model this guy, this is only a drawing, but still, so if we need to model this guy, I mean, the hair doesn't go out too much. There is no separate strands, you know, those separate pieces of hair, only one Elvis Presley thing. So you could just model it. If it doesn't have to be animated, if it doesn't have to wiggle, to move around, that's totally reasonable approach to go for. If you're not gonna use strong wind and the hair is not gonna, you know, move about. So that's way number one. Next is the one that you will use mostly, is using those just planes. Like here, you're creating a model for a hair, but strands, that's the word I was looking for earlier. So basically you create a model for each strand. So maybe it's easiest to see here. It's not one geometry, it's many intersecting planes. That's a very good, best example probably. So many intersecting planes here. I'll save these. And we don't care that they intersect, because what we're gonna do is we're gonna use alpha channel, so to speak, or, you know, opacity map. Oh, that's wrong. Yeah. So opacity channel or alpha map or whatever you call it. So basically, we won't see the whole thing. We will see only, you know, it will be transparent. Where here, where it's black, it will be transparent. You'll see many maps like this online. You can make it yourself, taking pictures of your own hair, or you'll find a lot of them. So basically we are creating strands. I think it's name of strands, right? So we are making these strands, and then we are using color plus opacity. You might use other, you might even use normal maps or whatever, but just in general, you would use transparent planes that somehow follow the shape of the head. And you could animate those planes, and they would look pretty good. if you do a good job at animating, of course. So basically, I'm lost here. Yeah. So basically, this is the way that most games today are doing it. Some, of course, could use physics to control these planes. Most of them don't. In most cases, it's baked in your FBX file. You animate it. You could still use dynamic simulation in Maya, whatever, but you would bake it into FBX file, and that's it. So that's the most common way of doing things. Now there is a third way of dealing with hair that you probably won't be touching for next, I don't know, 10 years. It's basically the way we do here in Maya, in Max, whatever. It's actually having a hair generator where we control main splines, and then we have a dynamic simulation of hair at all times. It intersects with head and so on and so on. So we can groom the hair, we can control it very nicely and have really photorealistic images. But this is not directly applicable for most game engines. I mean, there might be some crazy games that are inventing and using and doing this, but in general, as a rule, forget it. You're not gonna use it. Though it's possible to use this way of working and to convert it to this approach with the planes, and that we'll look into probably today later on in Maya's lecture, where we'll be looking at hair simulation, what we can do in Maya basically, and we'll see how can we convert it, basically baking it to such planes. So if I inspect this model here, I have, so you see it looks rather unimpressive with these planes. I don't think I have textures for this. Don't really remember where I got this model from, whatever. So there is kind of a general rule that your UVs should not overlap, and in this case they are not following this rule. If you notice this and this, you see it's totally the same here on our UV editor. So what does it let us do? You know, to conserve the space, we have only a couple of strands drawn here, 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 and here, and we are kind of mixing and matching them, and we are saving texture space. So again, some game engines would not be happy about overlapping texture islands, texture shells, whatever, shells, Maya, yeah. So you see here, oh sorry, move, yeah, I grab this, I move it, and there is another one beneath, and another one beneath, and another one beneath, which means they all will get the same texture that is applied here. So some game engines would not like it. In some cases it's called, you know, wrong, but as always we are cheating as much as we can, and sometimes that's the right approach of doing things. Depends on your game engine and your situation. Notice that the eyelids work the same way. We have this, and we would apply texture like yes, that, like this, for alpha channel or opacity, or how's it called in Maya? Actually, should use Maya's terms. Let's just assign whatever material and have a look. Transparency, probably just called. Sorry. Where is it? Well, whatever. Transparency, alpha, opacity, whichever term they're using. I can't find it at the moment. Doesn't matter. So basically, in some programs, it's called, you know, black is transparent and white is opaque, so visible. In some programs it's opposite, but in general you create just this image, and in most programs you can invert the image just with one button click, so it doesn't really matter if it's black and white or white and black, but most of the time white is opaque, so visible, black is transparent. It might be opposite in some programs, some game engines, who knows. But again, it's easy to, you know, in Photoshop, Control I, and you convert the image. As easy as that. Even paintbrush, paint. even this I think can inverse colors. So okay, it's too complicated program for me to use. Doesn't matter. So 3 different ways of approaching the hair. Again, recapping what I said, 1 piece of geometry, most simple way, because you don't need to deal with animation, more or less, or just use blend shapes, just as for a facial expression, you know, for some small animation when you are in a run cycle, walk cycle, or I don't know, something else. That's basically the simplest way. Next one is you create lots of planes, lots of simple geometry that you can control separately, and it has transparency to show the hair. And the third way is dynamically generated hair, like in this case, which is most photorealistic, usually used only in 3D softwares, Maya, Max, Blender, whatever, and not yet in game engines. Who knows, 10 years later, might be every game will be using this. So we will explore how it works in Maya later on today. Yeah, but for you, stick with this method most of the time, unless it's enough to have the whole, if your character is stylized, or it's a really low poly character, you know, and maybe you don't even use alpha channels because it's a character for mobile phone, and you are not allowed to use even alpha textures because of performance. So I would say 2 options for you: the plain one, when you're using these planes, or the whole thing is modeled into 1 piece. The whole structure of here is 1 piece. So pick your approach, depending on the situation, on of course the style of your game, and that's how you will go about it. So let's try making some nice hair today. Yeah, another thing, of course, you would not only use it for hair. Any fur, any feathers could be you know, approached the same way. Here we have feathers. Actually, probably should save it. It's not exactly. Oh. And that's when we model all the feathers, when we need a complicated wing scenario. But whatever, you can imagine it's the same approach for feathers you would use, unless you go for a really high poly complicated thing that you're probably not gonna use in games. Well, who knows, if it's main character, your bird, then might be the wing. Main important feathers would be actual models, not only textures. So consult your game design document from game scenario and level design class. Look at your characters and see for which character you can today try to make a hair, and let's try doing that.